Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Daily Night. I am Brian Smith, your host, and I am joined by Dustin Lewis of NoleGameday. He is the main contributing writer to the site. Thank you for coming on the show today, Dustin. How we doing, buddy?
Doing pretty well, Brian. Thanks a lot for having me tonight. Excited to talk some Florida State football and recruiting with you.
Yeah. As you know, and probably most of the people that follow this podcast, even leisurely, I go around the state a lot and see kids. I've seen some of the kids that are enrolled, some of the kids that are committed. And I just kind of want to share information with you, go back and forth, and let everybody kind of know what we think about the kids that just got to Florida State, some of the commitments, etc., and what Florida in general has going on. Because this 23 class that just about to be seniors in the fall, it is a dynamic group. So I actually just went and saw Richard Young a little bit ago at Lehigh High School and some of the players. I mean, this state is just loaded. So anyway, let's start this off. We'll start off with the 22 kids. There's a lot of talent that came into the Florida State class that's now on campus. I believe they got 11 kids, something like that, enrolled early, which is great because they get to go through spring ball. Mm-hmm. Whoever you want, whatever you've heard, talk about some of the kids that are committed to the Noles a little bit later, but for now, the kids that enrolled earlier that you've heard something about.
Yeah, like you said, Brian, Florida State signed 15 high school prospects in that 2022 class. 11 guys early enrolled, along with 10 transfers that Florida State was able to get in for the spring. And I would say, really, off the top of my head, the two guys that stood out the most were Sam McCall and Azari Thomas, two true freshman DBs out of the state of Florida. And really, just looking at them size-wise, they come in looking really good, and Florida State doesn't have a ton of its established depth at that cornerback unit right now. So there's potential for them to, I don't know about start this upcoming season, but definitely break into the rotation. And I mean, just from day one, tour of duty, which is what Florida State calls their off-season workouts, from day one of that to spring ball, I mean, these kids just lit a fire in that group with their competitive nature and open the eyes of that coaching staff. And sticking with the defense, also linebacker Omar Graham, who it kind of surprised me, came into Florida State 17 years old. Another guy who you look at really well put together, played down at Stranahan. He's a 3-star in Florida, but any other state, this kid is a 4-star, mid 4-star kind of talent. And he comes into Florida State, gets in at that linebacker group where there's not a ton of depth either. So another spot where a true freshman can break into the rotation and just flashes. I mean, he's out there getting tackles, getting interceptions. One thing that this team struggled with last year with those linebackers was coverage. And you look at Omar, I think that's somewhere he could potentially make an impact from day one.
Well, I remember seeing Omar's film, and I'm like, why isn't this kid ranked higher? I never went to one of the Stranahan games last year, but that's one of the prominent programs over the years in the city of Fort Lauderdale. And, if you play in Broward County and you're even an all-county kind of guy, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get a Division I scholarship. That county is loaded. So I'm kind of curious to see what he can do. And just from his body size, he reminds me some of the old Florida State guys from the late 80s to the early 2000s that were 6 foot 220, but they ran sideline to sideline and made plays. That's kind of what he is too. So I'm kind of curious to see what he can do. I've seen Sam McCall numerous times. I still don't know what position he'll end up at long term. He's a very, very long kid, 6'2" or more. Yep. If he can stay at corner, that would be great for Florida State. But, that's a hard position. I'm curious to see what he can do. But like we were talking before the show, they've got a couple other corners coming back. So maybe they get in the rotation, him and Thomas. But that's a good sign for Florida State. They need an influx of talent. Moving on to the kids committed for the class of 2023. I'm kind of looking at the list, and I know a few of them because I've seen them. But I'm just curious, what do you know most? Everybody asks about quarterback. What do you know most about Chris Parson, the kid out of the greater Nashville, Tennessee area?
Yeah, so the thing about Chris Parson is, a lot of people look at him and they're like, all right, this kid's been through 3 different high schools. And I think some people kind of knock that on him in the recruiting rankings because you're like, why has he done that? But he's had to move around a lot due to some family things and his dad's job. And he finally settled in at Ravenwood this past offseason and, got some stability with a coaching staff, began working more with QB trainers, and just absolutely broke out this past fall as a junior, leading Ravenwood to double-digit wins, getting them pretty deep into the playoffs, and they're primed for another run this upcoming season. And when you look at him, he's a true dual-threat quarterback. I mean, he's very good on the ground, but at the same time, this is a kid who's looking to pass first. He's looking down the field, trying to find, makes a lot of big plays deep downfield with his arm. I think you want to see him do a little bit more through down the middle, slants, outs, things like that. This upcoming season, his deep ball, you feel really comfortable with. I'm just kind of interested to see it, kind of in the middle. I don't know the word, the intermediate passing
Sure.
game. I guess you would say the checkdowns, things like that. But just a very impressive kid, puts in a ton of work off the field, is strongly committed to Florida State, committed. It's been about 10 months, so he's coming up on a year since last July when he did commit to Florida State. And just really has developed into the bell cow so far of this 2023 class, at the forefront of not only contacting recruits and trying to build a relationship with them, but also planning his visits to Tallahassee when top targets are coming through campus, making sure he's there, um, meeting recruits face to face and doing all he can to try and get Florida State back to the top.
Well, that's important. If your quarterback is not a leader in today's recruiting world, at least being proactive and communicating with other guys, even defensive players,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably not going to maximize. It doesn't matter what coast you're in, what state you're in. That's important. So good for Chris. And that leads to the following. They've got 6 kids committed. I personally really like the Sampson kid, the defensive lineman out of North Carolina. He's a big body, probably play 3 tech or 1 tech. Everybody needs that guy. He's a very good football player. I've seen Lamont Green multiple times. He's the son of the legendary player that played at Florida State. He's the son. I love him off to the edge. So D-line is headed in the right direction for Florida State. That's not in question. My question is to you, what do they need to do to finish out the 23 class? Like, what are the class needs? And if you want to throw out a couple of names like guys you think they have a shot at, fire away.
For sure, yeah. At this point in time, I would say what concerns me a little bit is the running back and the linebacker board.
Okay.
It's not really deep. You look at running back, they were hopeful to get Richard Young potentially, or maybe Cedric Baxter, who was previously committed to Florida State, back in the class. That's not going to transpire with those guys looking at some of the top programs in the country. So now they're kind of moving on a little bit. You've got Dalen Smothers out of North Carolina, Samuel Singleton, Dontavius Braswell, and Jalen Johnson, 2 guys out of Georgia, and then also Kylan Webb. So the running back board is kind of developing at this moment, and same thing with the linebacker board. It's a little thin. They've offered Caleb Lavely out of Georgia,
Yeah.
Justin Cryer out of Texas, but there's just not a lot of bodies there. And at the same time, Florida State, they play a 4-2-5 defense, so they're not going to have a ton of linebackers on the field on the majority of downs. But that's a room that they need to continue adding talent in. So I do want to see that board develop over the summer. You look at wide receiver, they're probably trying to bring in 4 to 5. You mentioned those 2 guys they have committed, and Goldie Lawrence and Vondrevious Jacobs. And now it's, can they get one of those top guys in the state? Hakeem Williams, William Foles, Jalen Brown, Tyler Williams, Santana Fleming. I mean, there's a ton of talent coming out of the state of Florida at wide receiver this year. Florida State's hoping to get one. At this time, it doesn't seem like Williams, Jalen Brown, Hakeem, or Tyler Williams are probably going to end up at Florida State. So then you're looking at guys like Keon Brown, William Foles, hoping you can somehow get them into the class to round it out. And same thing at tight end. You've got Randy Pittman committed.
Yep.
He's a probably an H-back type guy. Florida State really loves to move their tight ends around, but they want to add a second guy to this class, a bigger tight end, someone who's 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", who can provide versatility as a blocker and also as a receiver in the passing game. Because you look at that tight end room right now coming out of the spring, and it's pretty bleak for Florida State to say the least. I mean, they've got Cameron McDonald, but you look past that and yeah, they're going to need to either hit the transfer portal or hope someone develops before the start of fall camp. And you mentioned their good start on the defensive line. I think they want to continue to find a couple more edge rushers to kind of replace those losses. You lost Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas to graduation this past season, so that's a room. There's not a lot of veterans there, more of youth, and you want to see that talent develop, but also add hopefully a 4 or 5 star guy on top of it to keep it going. Lamont Green's a great start, but if you can get a Vic Burley or a TJ Searcy, some guy like that, you're feeling pretty good.
Yeah, D-line used to be the spot where Florida State just historically just killed it in
Yeah.
recruiting. And I mean, nobody recruited it better in the 90s. It wasn't even a second place. They've had some still in the last 10 years, even though they haven't been the same Florida State I was used to when I was growing up. They've had a lot of guys. The question is, can the O-line mature? You and I have talked about it, and every Florida State fan I know, good friend of mine's an FSU fan, it's like the O-line is holding us back. What I know this isn't recruiting. I've got to ask because it leads into it. Do you expect the O-line to be better this year for Florida State in the fall?
I do. They made some good additions this offseason, not only in the recruiting class, but in the transfer portal, bringing in Caden Lyles at center and Bless Harris, who can either play tackle
Yeah.
or guard for them. I don't know if any of the true freshmen like Julian Armella, Kayshawn Sapp, Jalen Early, guys like that can come in and contribute day one. But they do have a solid foundation that they kind of began to establish last year. You've got 4 starters coming back: Darius Washington, Robert Scott, Dylan Gibbons, and Maurice Smith to kind of add into those 2 transfers. So you've got 6 or 7 guys that you're feeling good about. But whenever you lose a guy or two to injuries, and we saw it in spring camp, Darius Washington ended up missing the conclusion of the practices, and from there the performance kind of dropped off. So it would be huge for them to land another offensive tackle out of the portal. They went pretty hard after George's and Marius Mims. That didn't end up working out for whatever reason. And now if you can get a tackle, if you can get a guard, if you can get anybody that can help contribute in 2022, that would shore up that unit a little bit more. You feel decent with what you have, but there's just not a lot of depth in the event of someone going out. And that's going to happen in a 12, 13 game season.
Well, it's football. It's about attrition. There's no politically correct way to say it. Players get hurt, the next guy comes in. If he's a weakness, the opposing coaching staff is probably going to attack it. That's just the name of the game. It's not a newsflash. So it would be interesting to see, because they always have skill talent too. If they could run the ball consistently, maybe a certain quarterback would look a heck of a lot better if it was consistent. Because there were times last year where Florida State would gash people. I mean, they almost beat Notre Dame. They played well against Miami in certain stretches, but then they would have a drive that looked goofy. They were very hard to figure out. And I'm sure as a Florida State fan, that probably sticks in your craw a little bit, because why is this happening? So if they get that fixed, I think the program will be much different. Before getting your overall take on Florida State as a program, you had mentioned a minute ago, Florida State needs that guy at receiver. I finally published an article a week or so ago that had 41 receivers in it from the class of 23 that I think are Power 5 players that I have seen in the state of Florida for this upcoming class. 41.
That doesn't surprise me you made that list, though.
I mean, it took 2.5 years to do it. 2.5 years. And I don't get to see everybody, but that's still a lot of kids. And I'm sure, I don't know all the kids at Dillard. I don't know all the kids at Stranahan and this, and there's probably a couple more somewhere on the Space Coast or whatever. It's a humongous list. When I was growing up and watching Florida State, D-line I mentioned a minute ago, always got them. I guarantee you every year they had at least 1 4-star, if not 2 4-star or above recruits at wide receiver. Why do you think Florida State suddenly it just blows my mind. Goldie Lawrence is really good, by the way, that he'll play. But why do you think that's I don't understand. What am I missing, especially when a year when there's a bazillion of them?
Yeah, it kind of baffles me as well. Florida State is in some decent position for some of these top guys, but I think when you just look at the offense, the past couple of years, Mike Norvell's first year in Tallahassee in 2020, it was a really run-oriented offense.
Sure.
As Jordan Travis kind of began to find his footing. And same thing kind of last year. Early on, it was same thing, pound the rock, hope we can run the ball, get first downs, get into the red zone and score. And then at the latter half of the year, you saw it against Miami, against Boston College, a little bit against Florida, but Jordan Travis injured his throwing shoulder pretty early in that one. He began to make those progressions in the passing game. The happy feet stopped in the pocket. He began to deliver throws downfield, make big plays in crucial situations. I mean, the 4th and 14 pass
Oh,
against Miami to set Florida State up for that game-winning touchdown. So he showed that he does have the capability of a passer. And at the same time, Florida State's receiving core last year was absolutely terrible. They did address that this offseason, bringing in 4 transfers. So you're hoping that passing game makes a pretty tremendous leap this upcoming season. We'll see how it all works out. But recruiting wise, I think a lot of it has to do with the stability of wide receivers, Coach Ron Dugan's. There was some discussions this offseason that Florida State was potentially looking to move on from him. And, there were some candidates that they were talking to, and it didn't end up coming to fruition. So they signed him to another 1-year deal. Heading into this contract, you have to think it's probably his last year at Florida State, and I think that could be potentially turning some players off. And just in general, since Ron Dugans has been at Florida State, they haven't done very well at landing wide receivers. In 2019, they didn't even land an offensive skill player, let alone a wide receiver. Yeah,
how is that possible at
I
Florida State? Look. I don't care if you fired everybody in the athletic department. I don't care. It's Florida State. How hard can it be? It's Florida State.
Yeah, they didn't land a single offensive skill player in 2019. I think they got 2 receivers last year. You had some guys you were in the running for this year. You had Devontae Mortimer committed going into
He would have
signing
walked in and
day.
played. He'd have walked in and played. That guy can fly.
Yeah, he flips to Louisville. I think he's going through some legal trouble right now. But regardless, that was a guy who was extremely talented that Florida State wanted, and Louisville came in and flipped him. A couple guys flipped from Florida State on early signing day.
Yeah, signing day
obviously,
did not
so,
go well for Florida State. It was
to say
crazy.
the least. And I just think all the coaching changes, the instability across the program has just impacted not just wide receiver recruiting in general, because Florida State,
Sure.
they haven't been landing those top 10, top 5 recruiting classes that we were used to seeing. Heck, I mean, just 5 years ago in 2017, I think they had like the number 3 or number 4 overall recruiting class in the country. And
It
from
was
there,
balanced too. They
it's
had
just
players
spiraled.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. It's just like, think about it this way. You mentioned the 2019 class did not have an offensive skill guy. 19, 20, 21, 22. Those are your seniors. Not having somebody that's in their 4th year, knowing the system, blah, 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 blah. And that's the guy that carries the load for you, literally.
Mm-hmm.
That does not bode well. I don't care how many transfers you get, because you just don't know what the chemistry is going to be. I understand the transfer portal is exciting, but give me the high school kid that is good, because especially for getting Florida and South Georgia kids and stuff, South Alabama, like Florida State always has. Those kids can play. And then if they go through your system, that's the kid I want. To not have a skill guy in an entire class at Florida State on offense is unfathomable to me. It's the only thing that this will probably make you happy. A certain school in Coral Gables, Florida, didn't have a single guy committed until the very end of the last head coach's tenure. And I'm like, how can you be at Miami and not have a commitment from South Florida kids? That is any position. I was just like, that's the worst recruiting stat I've ever seen. But still, for Florida State, now you're reaping that situation, and by plugging in guys from the portal, you switch a position from a DB or something. You know what I mean? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So that's tough. But you know what? If they can somehow get through this year, and let's say, in your opinion, if Florida State goes 8-4 or more, does the staff stay? Yay or nay? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think even 7-5 would keep the majority of the staff in Tallahassee. I do think Mike Norvell is probably going to make some changes. I mentioned Ron Dugans. I think there's a couple other position coaches he could look at trying to upgrade moving forward. And he's been confident, quietly confident about this upcoming season. I think he likes what Florida State has at the top end of that roster. There's just not of a lot of established depth. So really, you're
Right.
banking on a lot of your top guys staying healthy. I mean, Jordan Travis. Florida State doesn't have a backup quarterback right now. You've got redshirt sophomore Tate Rodemaker and true freshman AJ Duffy behind Travis, and he's had some injury issues in 2020 and 21. So at any given time, he's one snap away from going out of the football game. Last year, you're able to plug in Mackenzie Milton a little bit, which didn't go very well either. But I'm not even confident that Rodemaker or Duffy would be an upgrade from Milton right now, which is pretty concerning to say. So quarterback depth, something to watch out for. But going back to your original question, I do think 7-5, 8-4 keeps them in Tallahassee. I'm just not convinced it does a lot for the current 2023 recruiting class because when you look at the state of recruiting today, all these kids are making their decisions prior to the season.
Yes.
Um, yeah, everyone's committing prior to the season to sign on early signing day. So regardless if Florida State's looking good in December, you're going to have a lot of guys that have already committed elsewhere and are pretty solid in those pledges heading into the early signing period. I think it's important for Florida State to try and tie some guys down now, which is what they did last year. They got a flurry of commitments from late April to August that really solidified that class. And then you start
Sure.
out 0-4, and then it started falling off with guys decommitted. And we saw the culmination on early signing day. But the hope is you get the guys in the fold this time. You start out the season not 0-4 with some momentum. You make it back to a bowl game, show some progress is happening. Hopefully, end with a 2022 class in the top 20 range, and you use the success that you got on the field this year to drive into that 2024 class where they've already got a couple solid players committed. Cam Davis, Jordan Pride, Luke Kroman Hoke, guys like that they can build on moving into next year.
Yeah, they do. And again, it's not that hard to recruit to Florida State. It's just not. So if the staff, and again, I don't know much about Florida State staff like you do. Obviously, you work and follow the Noles. If that staff can somehow pull off 8-4 or better this year, I'd be curious to see if they could flip some kids
Mm-hmm.
in October, November, and then the month of December. It's not out of the realm of possibility. A lot of kids, in my opinion, and this is from talking to high school coaches and players all off the record. I'm not going to put anybody on the record with these.
For sure.
They're all in wait and see mode with Florida State. All of them. And it doesn't matter what the coaching staff tells them right now. I know Florida State fans don't want to hear that, but I have not had one kid this spring that I went somewhere and was excited about Florida State. Not one kid. And I've been to a practice all but like one day since spring ball started. It's what I do. I got rained out one day in Fort Lauderdale, but that's it. Nobody's talking about it. And it's just going to be one of those deals. They have to come out and surprise people this fall. That's my opinion. And unfortunately for Florida State, recruits' opinions too. But it's there. I mean, it's not like people don't know that Florida State is in Tallahassee. So we will see very soon. What is your one last take about Florida State? What do they need to do on the field this year besides Jordan Travis? That's the obvious. If he doesn't play better, I mean, quarterback plays everything. I get it. Besides that, what do they need to do to really help elevate their record?
Yeah, I mentioned the offensive line. I mean, just staying as healthy as you can with that top unit. Hopefully, that'll lead to a ton of stability and success on offense. And you look over the defensive line. Really, the key is trying to offset the loss of Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas, two guys who were absolutely terrific off the edge. Obviously, Jermaine
Yeah,
Johnson win the first round to the New York Jets on
Jermaine was a
Thursday night,
stud.
and they feel comfortable. I mean, they've got 5 or 6 guys that they think they can plug in there in a variety of situations. You look at the transfer coming in, Jared Verse. He's coming from FCS to FBS from Albany. I kind of had some question marks. I was like, is he going to be able to transition quickly this spring? And by the end of the spring, he was one of the leaders on that defense. He was all over the field in the spring game. I mean, the offense could barely run a play. It felt like whenever he was coming off the edge. And you pair him with another guy who's been in the program for 3 or 4 years, and Derek Mcclendon, who's finally starting to break out as well. We got some young guys behind him like Pat Payton. Florida State flexed out Dennis Briggs to defensive end to help there because their interior defensive line has a ton of depth. You got Robert Cooper, Fabian Lovett, Malcolm Ray, and Jarrett Jackson, who both started games last year. Because Dennis Briggs, he was on the interior defensive line, but he got hurt. And that gave those guys in the back end of the rotation some time to develop, get more playing time. And then, bam, you're feeling really good with those 4 inside. So you flex them out to D end. So I think it's up to the defensive line and also guys like in the secondary, Jamie Robinson, Akeem Dent, locking down the safety spot. And I think we talked, I don't know if it was on the recording or before we got on here, but Kevin Noles, Morion Cooper, some younger guys at cornerback, Thomas McCall as well. They also got a transfer from Louisville, Greedy Vance, who they're going to be plugging in at cornerback. So they're cautiously optimistic that the defense is going to rebound in a big way this upcoming season, not just up front with a defensive line, but also in the back end. And I think the defense is going to have to carry Florida State earlier in the season as Jordan Travis gets used to those new playmakers at wide receiver and in the backfield with a guy like Trey Benson. But like I said about Mike Norvell, you've got to be feeling cautiously optimistic with the top end of this roster heading into the season.
Well, that's what you can start with. I mean, that fall camp is for finding your depth.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a news flash either. And if he has an established group, that's something you work from. And then again, the $1 million question, does Jordan stay healthy? If he doesn't, I mean, nobody does well when you lose your starting quarterback. It's just, how well is Alabama going to do if they lose Bryce Young? Not very well. It's just the way it is. The game is set up for quarterback play now. You cannot lose your quarterback, and it's a contact sport. It's kind of a catch-22. So, well, Dustin, I appreciate it, man. It's been fun. I'll have you back on probably sometime in fall camp. I don't know what Norvell will let you guys do in terms of information. I'm guessing very little because he's under the gun. I'm sure the media is going to get shunned, I'm sure. But what are you going to do?
So, yeah, you got to keep it pretty vanilla overall. So hopefully we can say some things, but we're not going to be able to talk, about depth chart and stuff like that. But maybe a couple interesting tidbits will come out of it.
We'll see. Well, Dustin, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Hold on here with me. Everybody out there, please thank Dustin on the comments on YouTube and whatnot. But be safe, and everybody have a great night.